Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024. Wish Oscar a happy birthday today. Happy birthday, Oscar. We are in the book of 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Now Gilgal is in the northeast of Israel, and Bethel is in the center part of Israel. And so they're making a journey from the north further south, and they're both on the major road that's the trade road, so they're going the main road through Israel. Verse 3, the company of the prophets at Bethel came to Elisha and said, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied, "but do not speak of it." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he replied, "but do not speak of it." Now, Jericho is in the southeast of Israel. In fact, it was on the east side of the kingdom of Judah. And it's a little unclear, but apparently Israel at this point in time controlled Jericho, and so it's still in the country that Ahab's family controls. And it's not in Judah where Jehoshaphat's family controls. Now, they're in alliance right now, so probably traveling back and forth between the two would be easy. The prophets would have no problem. One of the advantages to that kind of alliance is the countryside is actually peaceful. It is not a dangerous countryside. There is points in time in history where going from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho would put you in dangerous territory where highwaymen would rob you, beat you up, kill you, take your goods, kidnap you and hold you for ransom, things like that. Now, Elijah and Elisha probably don't have to worry about that. Let's face it, Elijah has just gotten off of commanding fire to come down from heaven and burn 111 men up. So he's not too concerned about it. Elisha will have similar experiences, and he trusts God, and he trusts Elijah, and he trusts God with Elijah, and so he's not too worried. But they're traveling, and the total distance they're going to travel, if they traveled the shortest route, is over 100 miles. If they're traveling the main road, which is probably the conclusion you should come to, they're going to travel about 125 miles. Normally this would be like a 2-week journey. But we find in every city where they go, there's a band of prophets. And the prophets are getting words from God. This contrasts very strongly with the beginning of Elijah's ministry, where he's the only prophet left that's preaching. There is a minister of the king who's hidden 100 prophets in a cave and is protecting them, hiding them, and they can't go anywhere. They can't be seen in public just to keep them alive. and he's feeding them. Now there's assemblies of prophets in different cities that are controlled by Ahab's family, and they're openly out in public and able to go out and meet Elijah and Elisha on the road and declare God's word in public, and they're unmolested. So Elijah has managed to achieve a remarkable victory and a remarkable spiritual reformation in this country that is technically God's but is very pagan. It is now publicly acceptable to be worshiping Yahweh and to support people who lead Yahweh worship. And they are hearing from God and preaching God's word, and they come out and meet their heroes, Elijah and his manservant Elijah and his manservant Elisha, and they're thinking they're giving a warning from God. They're warning Elijah that he's going to be taken up, and Elisha that his master is going to be taken away from him. And they don't totally understand. And they think they're giving a warning. Now, Elijah knows this, and he's intentionally going to his fate. I think he knows that God has told him he's going to get to go directly to heaven. He's not going to have to die, and that he's going to be taken out of his pain and suffering that he's had here on earth. And he's looking forward to it. Elisha, and I get those two words, two names confused. I'm sorry if I say the wrong one. Elisha is aware that God's going to take his master from him and knows he's the guy to continue the ministry that has been started, but Elijah is getting too old to continue and to do, and God is going to take him out, and Elisha is going to get to finish the job. This task is, you have two prophets to do the work of one. The task is that big. You cannot do it with one prophet. He's tried, he's done his best, but his end is near, and he has an unfinished task. And he has an apprentice that's going to do the job for him, to finish the job. And so this is one prophetic ministry in two prophets. But they're met at different cities as they go with companies of prophets that prophesy for Yahweh. And they know word from Yahweh that what's going to happen. And Elisha knows that and just tells him, yes, I know, be quiet. He means to see it through. He's told Elijah, I'm going to be with you to the end, and he means it. And Elijah keeps trying to put him off and says, oh, stay in this city. I think Elijah is testing Elisha to see if Elisha will actually fulfill what he says he will do. He may also be embarrassed to have Elisha see Elijah at his end, not totally knowing how God's going to do it, and fearing that he's just going to go out in the wilderness and just collapse and be no more. That it might be like Moses, where, he died on the mountainside, but God took his body. And, he doesn't want to subject Elisha to that. We don't totally know. He didn't record it. He didn't tell Elisha why he was doing this. We just have Elisha's record of what he did. And we kind of have to interpret it for ourselves. But he was, in some sense, Elijah was trying to protect Elisha. And I think it's miraculous. They're walking that far in a day. All the prophets say your master's going to be taken from you today, and they're walking much further than a day's walk. This is reminiscent of when Elijah, early in his ministry, outran the chariot. They're doing incredible distances on foot. Even if you had war horses that they were riding, would be an incredible distance to ride a horse. And riding horses was not common that day. And very often if you did, you didn't ride it hard. They didn't have a system set up where you could ride a horse hard for 10 miles, which is about the practical limit, and stop and exchange horses with somebody and get a fresh horse and ride 10 more miles hard. That's what, in the western United States, when the U.S. military needed to pass messages around, the U.S. government delivered mail, that's what they did. They had, horse stations every 10 miles, and you rode the horse hard, and you got off and you dropped it off at the station, you picked up a fresh horse, and you got on and you went on, and the station's job was to take the horse that just came in, rest it up, feed it, water it, groom it, let it rest up several days till somebody else took it out again. And, they would get their horses back in a few days as it rested up at the next station, and then somebody would bring it back. And they had constant communication, and the horses were constantly going back and forth. There was not that system there, and even if it was, Elijah would not have had that kind of political and economic import that he would get to ride horses across this distance. Well, technically you could do it. If he was riding one horse, which might be a stretch, but he might have been able to afford one horse, it would not have ridden that far in a day without it being a miracle. So he's most likely walking. And he's walking a 2-week walk in a day. Verse 6. Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." So they're at Jericho, and he's trying to get Elisha to stay at Jericho. But he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men of the company of prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. So, in Jericho, and remember, this is a fairly newly rebuilt city. It's only been 2 generations since the city was rebuilt, and it's less than a generation since Elijah started this reformation, this revival in the northern kingdom, in Israel, and it now has a company of prophets big enough they can send 50 men out just to watch what Elijah and Elisha are going to do. And they stand there, and Jericho is at the top of the Jordan Valley, and from Jericho at the last ridge, the last hill on the road, you can see all the way down to the Jordan. You can see up the other side of the Jordan Valley into the country that we now call Jordan. And at the time it's Moab. And they can see up out of the valley onto the other side. It's about 20 miles. So it's easy to see, but it's not that you have a 20-mile horizon because it's flat. You have a 20-mile horizon because there's about a 300-foot drop from the top of the valley down to the bottom and back up to the other side. And then when you're on the other side of the valley, then you can't see anymore because you got to the top of another hill. And even though its width across there is about 20 miles, the depth and the winding road, because you don't go down that steep of a slope in a straight road. They've got switchbacks and it winds back and forth, and they've found the easiest walking path. And across the Jordan there is not a 20-mile trek. It's about a 60-mile trek or more. And they watch them, and they stand on the hill, and they watch them go down there. And so this is miraculous walking again. They're walking incredibly fast, faster than you would expect, and they can see them. And they see what they're doing. And Elijah acts like he's got a word from God and knows exactly what he's doing. And he takes his cloak off and he rolls it up and he swacks the water and it divides. So they see the miracle that Joshua and the priests did back at the beginning of them coming into the land. And they see it with their own eyes. And Elijah did it. And they know he's a prophet, but now they've seen another miracle. So you have, not only has the revival got to the point, there's companies of prophets in all these cities. Jericho has a company of prophets big enough they can have 50 men from the company of prophets stand on the hillside and watch these two guys walk away. And they can afford to do that. And they see a miracle. And they testify to this miracle. And they watched them cross over on dry ground. Verse 9. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. "You have asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours, otherwise not." So Elijah is giving a conditional statement, a conditional granting of Elijah's request. Elijah knows that unless he has God's Spirit on him, he cannot finish the job he's supposed to do. That finishing Elijah's task is going to take an enormous presence of God in his life. And he asks for a double portion of the Spirit that Elijah had. Let's face it, Elijah faced down a king and his armies and a whole town full of false prophets and a vengeful queen. And as a single man, totally calmly stands them down, performs miracles. He's got that kind of presence in God. And he's gone out and he's lived in a valley that should be bone dry, and he's drinking from water from the brook. And he's eating food that carrion birds are bringing him, and it's not making him sick. It's not rotted meat. It's not rotted bread. It is good bread, good meat. And when it all dries up and goes away, God sends him off across through the country to an allied country that's more pagan than the one he came from. And he lives with a widow. And daily miracle. He gets fed a handful of meal and a handful of olive oil, and 3 people eat for months or years every day, enough to sustain life. And it doesn't run out until after the crops come in. I mean, he's seen all kinds of miracles. He's done all kinds of miracles. He knows God is there for him. And Elisha wants that. And he wants a double portion of it so he can finish the job. And he doesn't know whether God will work in him the same way, but he wants God to work in him the same way. And Elijah knows that he's got the determination to follow him, but he's not going to grant him that. He's going to grant it to him conditionally. If you see me, if you're staying with me, if you're watching me, and God lets you see me go up, then you'll get your request. You'll get that double portion of spirit, and you'll be able to do the job. If you don't, if you fail to watch and you fail to pay attention, then basically God will task you with the task, but you'll fail at the job. That's all the unsaid things going on here. And Elijah knows that a double portion on Elisha is a difficult thing, that Elisha will not live an easy life. Elijah did not. I mean, let's face it, he had to face down a country by himself. Now, when they're leaving, they've got allies meeting them all over the place. All that's happened during his ministry. If he had walked the opposite direction at the beginning of his ministry, he would have been walking alone, and he would have been walking in hostile territory, and nobody would have been greeting him. Nobody would have been telling him what's going on. He would have just been doing it by himself. He's coming back with a servant that will be twice as strong as him, and large companies of people are meeting him and telling him exactly what's going on, and he knows that. So he knows that God has worked a miracle, but God's not finished. Verse 11, as they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his own clothes and tore them apart. He picked up the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. When he took the cloak that had fallen from him and struck the water with it, where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. So he got to see Elijah taken up into heaven, a chariot of fire and horses of fire. He saw something. That description, boggles the mind. He didn't really understand what he'd seen. He gave us the best description he could have. I'm sure it happened so fast that it's just, boom, it's there and it's gone, and he watches the miracle and then he's trying to process it. What is a chariot of fire? What is a horse of fire? Artists have drawn these pictures for millennia now, and I can guarantee you Elisha did not look at any of those artistic renderings and say, yeah, you got it right, or I don't think you got it quite right. He gave this description, and he was not concerned with the outer visual aspects. He understood that God did it, and that this was God's doing and God's vessel and God's horses and chariots, and that it was a heavenly thing, it was a spiritual thing, and that Elijah was taken up directly into heaven and didn't have to suffer death. And that taken up into heaven in a whirlwind. he was, you would think if it was a chariot of fire and horses of fire, they would grab Elijah and go up to heaven at a gallop. No, they grab him and head, and a whirlwind picks the chariot up and the horses up and carries them up. And so he's carried up to heaven in a tornado, basically. And this chariot of fire and these horses of fire are carried up to heaven in a tornado. That kind of boggles the mind, what's going on. And Elisha sees it, and he's overwhelmed. He's just crying out, exclaiming, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. That was the most powerful thing he could see that reminded him. And God had done something much more powerful, much more dynamic, much more awesome than the military might of the day. And he looks there, and there's Elijah's cloak that divided the water. He probably hadn't planned out, how am I going to get back across the Jordan? Yes, the Jordan at Jericho is a ford across the Jordan. You can cross there. There was a way to do it. But, well, he picks up the cloak. He walks back to the Jordan. And he asks God where he is. And he repeats the miracle. And by repeating the miracle, he knows God is with him. He knows that when they crossed that Jordan, he couldn't have rolled his cloak up and whacked the water and expected it to part and cross on dry land. Elijah did. He comes back and he performs the same miracle, and he knows that he has a double portion of God's Spirit that Elijah had. He knows he has been anointed by God to finish the task Elijah was called to do, and that now he has been called to do. He knows his calling. He knows it beyond any doubt. He knows God will speak through him, and he will do God's work, and that he will do miracles. He doesn't know what. He just knows he's God's man at this point in time, at this point in history, and it's going to happen. What exactly, all the details, he doesn't know. He just trusts. Verse 15, the company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. They could tell it. And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. Look, they said, we, your servants, have 50 able men. Let them go and look for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has picked him up and set him down on some mountain or in some valley. So they're offering to go look for Elijah's body. They're thinking in earthly terms. And maybe Elijah's still alive out there somewhere, and, he needs to be found and brought back, and, being up in the air like that, maybe, when he fell to the earth, he's injured, and we need to go tend his wounds. Elisha knows better. Elisha knows he's gone up to heaven. There's no point in looking. So, the last part of verse 16. No, Elisha replied, do not send them. He knows it's pointless. Don't do it. Don't waste your time. Let's get on with the task God has assigned to me. And Elijah's finished with his task. He's been a faithful servant. God took him up to heaven. And we're done. Don't go back. Don't look at the past. Let's look at the future. That's what he's saying. Verse 17, but they persisted till he was too ashamed to refuse. So he said, send them. And they sent 50 men who searched for 3 days and did not find him. When they returned to Elisha, who was staying in Jericho, he said to them, Didn't I tell you not to go? He's trying to teach them a lesson. Yes, these are prophets of Yahweh, and they're proclaiming Yahweh's word, and they're preaching, and they're converting people, and they're ministering in God's name, and they don't see the big picture. Elisha does. He knows it's pointless. He tells them not to. They keep pestering him until he becomes ashamed and says, sure, go. Waste your time. And they spend 3 days. 50 men searching for 3 days. And they knew the countryside. They were locals. They were searching their area. 3 days of 50 men searching, you can cover a lot of territory, and you can make sure that you covered it all. And they come back after 3 days and know he's not out there. Now, Elisha knew he was already in heaven. Had no point in looking for him. He's not here. They can't imagine your body just disappearing. Oh, sure, they've read about Enoch who walked with God, and then he was no more. They know about Moses and his body. God killed him and his body was no more. He buried him, and we don't have any record of where he was anymore. Yeah, they got those stories, but they don't connect the pieces that this man that they know that he has ministered before them, and they've believed Yahweh, and they're now ministering in Yahweh's name. He's as important as these 2 men in history, Enoch and Moses. And that his body is just not there. They're not going to find it. They can't imagine that. And honestly, if that happened to me, I would be like, bodies don't just disappear. They don't evaporate. It's somewhere. But it wasn't. And they went out, diligently searched, didn't find. They came back, and Elisha rebukes them for it, because they should have paid attention to Elisha. And when he said, don't go, don't go. So we know from the very beginning of Elisha's ministry, he can perform miracles. He's going to do some of the same miracles that Elijah did, but he's going to finish the task. Verse 19. The men of the city said to Elisha, Look, my lord, this town is well situated, as you can see, but the water is bad and the land is unproductive. Bring me a new bowl, he said, and put salt in it. So they brought it to him. Then he went out to the spring and threw the salt in it, saying, This is what the Lord says, I have healed this water, never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive. And the water was remained wholesome to this day, according to the word Elisha had spoken. So the citizens of that city have a problem. They have a spring, but the water isn't good to drink. It is harmful to people. And when they water the land with it, it doesn't cause crops to grow. And, it's unfit. It's good land, but the water source is bad. And they can't grow things. They can't drink it. And, what are they going to do? And so he tells them, Bring me a bowl and fill it full of salt, and he goes and takes the salt and dumps it in the well, in the spring. Now the thing is, salting water does not make it grow crops better. It does not make it more palatable to drink. It does not make it safer, cleaner. You put enough salt in there to sterilize it, it's unfit to drink, and it's unfit to water crops with. If you don't put enough salt in it to sterilize it, it's still unsanitary water. If it had some poison or toxin in it, adding salt is going to make it less safe. And they know that. And they watch Elisha do an action that should make things worse, and it solves the problem. I've heard all kinds of explanations through the years that there was some sort of heavy metal that would precipitate with chloride, and because he put chloride in the water, it precipitated the metal out, and it was no longer in the water, and the water was therefore safe to drink. And when you watered the land with it, it would make the thing is a bowl full of salt might make a few hours or few days worth of that if that was the case, but it wouldn't solve the problem. It would never be a permanent solution. I'm a chemist, and I understand that, and stoichiometry of it is it would take, several wagon loads of salt to be a permanent solution for that kind of thing. And in the meantime, the water would be too salty to use, and the water would be salty and poisonous from salt. So he's just making a symbolic thing, and God's the one that heals the water. You cannot explain this by natural means. It just doesn't work. And yet, he did it to show that God wanted them to be able to live in that land. They asked for it. He did the miracle. It worked. It is a miracle. Verse 23. From there, Elijah went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some youth came out of the town and jeered at him. "Go on up, you bald head," they said. "Go on up, you bald head." So, he's walking along the road, and these youths come out, and they see him, and apparently he has a bald head. As my pastor I grew up under, who was also bald, joked, God made some heads perfect. The rest of them he had to cover up in hair. And, he's got that perfected head. But they're jeering him, they're making fun of him, and they're basically saying, get out of town, and calling him bald head, and, just being rude. It tells you something about the culture of the day, that you thought they could make fun of an old man and get away with it, and be rude to him, and jeer him, and he's just a traveler passing through. That means they've been making fun of people up and down that path for a while. This isn't just a spontaneous, they decided to go pick some random dude, or maybe they knew the prophet was coming through and they decided, we're just going to go jeer the prophet that's replacing the prophet that was so powerful, and make fun of him. They've been doing this to other people. They've been being rude and belligerent to other people. Verse 24. He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the youth, and he went on to Mount Carmel, and from there returned to Samaria. So he looks at them, he knows their spirit, and he asks God to deal with them, and that God would curse them. And 2 bears run out of the woods and maul them to death. And he walks off scot-free. He has the confidence that Elijah did. He knows he can stand up to 450 prophets and a king and a queen and an army and call down fire from heaven if God tells him to. He knows that a couple of misspent youth taunting him is nothing. And he doesn't know how necessarily God's going to do it. And when he sees it happen, it doesn't faze him that the bears do it and protect him and leave him alone. and the bears walk away unscathed. 42 men, even if they're not armed with much, should be enough to take on 2 bears and, do a pretty good number on the bears. No, bears win. It's a miracle. Now, admittingly, misspent youth probably aren't trained warriors, and they probably aren't armed, and they have some other disadvantages. God probably knows exactly what he's doing, but he teaches them a lesson. And the town people see it and know that a prophet has been among them. So at the beginning of Elisha's ministry, he is working spiritually powerful miracles, and people are seeing it and knowing that he is God's man. And that he's going to do things that Elijah did and be that kind of powerful prophet that Elijah was. Holy Father, you are our protector. You are supreme. You are not to be mocked, nor are your people to be mocked. You will defend your own. And even if in this life you defend us by taking us up to be with you in heaven, we will be protected in heaven with you for all eternity. Lord, I ask that you make us bold like Elijah and Elisha were, that we would proclaim your word well and boldly, trust in you. For you're the same God today that you were then. You will always be that same kind of God, for you have always been that same God. Have us to boldly do your work here on this earth. Lord, I thank you for a successful church work day yesterday at church, that a lot of things got accomplished, that tasks were started, tasks were completed. The church looks better. The church is better repaired, that we are better able to function in that church. And we're going to continue doing things that need to be done. Lord, I ask that you bless those that work, and that in the next work day and the tasks that are going to be done by professionals in the meantime, that you would bless them and that it would go well and easily, and that people stay safe. Lord, the next task we have up before us is Vacation Bible School, where we will invite the community into our church to proclaim the good news to them. Help us to do that well, that everything from registration at the very start to clean up at the very end, and every process that goes on in the between time, whether it's keeping children entertained beforehand, opening assembly, music, mundane things like restroom time and washing hands, to the spiritual things of teaching the lessons and proclaiming your word, that it all go according to your plan and your purpose, that the children would hear your word, seeds would be planted, souls would be reaped for the kingdom, people would be discipled, and they would understand your truth and your strength and your power. Help them to memorize scripture and it stay with them, and when they need it, your spirit will draw it out of them, and they will know you're a living, powerful, working God. Lord, give us the strength and the endurance. Keep us pure before you and holy, so that we can do your work and do it well. Lord, there's so much illness and decline in among us, yet we need you to lift us up and make us strong and do it well. And we ask for that in your holy name. Amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, and this has been the Wednesday Evening Bible Study for Wednesday, May 22nd, 2024. This was recorded on my 64th birthday, May 19th, 2024, and Oscar started a good sermon series on prophecy today, and told us that Christ is going to return to earth, and we look forward to that time. Had interesting teaching on hell at evangelism practice training tonight, and if you missed that, ask the participants that were there and have them teach it to you. And I promise that the promise I made to them, I will eventually research the topics that didn't get taught tonight and bring that back to you. Probably not on this forum. I'll probably do it in the evangelism training class, and when you hear that, you want to be there. I may do it on Wednesday evening just because it's a big task, and I estimate it's going to take me a year or more to get done what I think God's laid on my heart to do. But I'm excited by it, in case you can't tell. Hell is not something you normally get excited about. We should not be looking forward to it. It is a dread topic, and it's a dreadful topic, but it's an important one, and I mean to do it with all due diligence. Have a blessed week. I hope to see you Wednesday night at the Bible study. If I don't, I hope to see you next Sunday, where we will meet again and worship in God's name. Until then, if nothing else, we'll see you here on YouTube. Have a blessed week.